came up with this idea, our first tasking, of course, was to try to find a chaplain or a local pastor or somebody to come out and help us put this program on. Well, not only did we find a chaplain, we got real lucky. I think I'm probably as guilty as a lot of people that go through our walk of life, the military. If I ever thought about chaplains in my younger days, I always kind of thought they were the guys that took the easy way out, you know. They were not out there doing the real things we were doing. Well, it didn't take me long in my career to learn how the error in my ways and how wrong that was. And we certainly have an example of the chaplain that has been there, that has walked in our shoes, here with us this morning. All you have to do is look at that rainbow on his chest to know that he's been there. And I won't go through his old biography, which most of it is there in the program for you. But he is a native of right here in Florida, a native of Lake County, and one of our own. And I think we're extremely fortunate this morning to have Chaplain Bob Haines.
Thank you, Commander. It is good to be with you this morning. This is my home, so I feel comfortable. I've driven by Pinecastle since I was a baby almost, I guess, back in the 40s and early 50s, but I never came out here. I never really knew what it looked like, but I always passed by out here on 19. I remember as a young child, during the early 50s, spending the evening with a friend of mine over in Astor Park, and we used to hear them bombing up here during the Korean War, so that tells you how long this kind of stuff has been going on here. You follow the footsteps of a lot of people who spent their time out here in the old dinosaur forest doing what you do. And I really like the area, and it is an extreme privilege, believe it or not, for me to be here. I'm one of those guys that I enjoy being in the field. I enjoy being with the Marines. I enjoy being on ship. I enjoy being overseas. I enjoy being someplace other than around a lot of sailors in a big base. You know, Cecil Field is a nice place, and so are other places I've been, but I enjoy this kind of thing a lot more than I do staying where I do. Unfortunately, I have to do that because of a lot of the work and a lot of the needs that we have up there. A former chaplain of the Senate, United States Senate, was asked this question: as you look out over the Senate, do you pray for each senator? You can imagine the chaplain of the Senate looking out over the senator, all those senators out there, and they said, do you pray for every one of those senators? And the chaplain replied, no, when I look out over the Senate, I pray for the nation. And I guess that's true. I was out in the Med with the 26th Marine Amphibious Unit, and I was on board the USS El Paso, which is a store ship, and LKA 117. And my CO, because there were other chaplains in the unit, was not on my particular ship, but in the 5 ships deployed with us, gave me the okay to go to Rota, Spain for a week to attend our annual Protestant Professional Development Training course that the Chaplain Corps has every year. And so, of course, the trick is, how do you get from your ship out in the Med to Rota, Spain? And so I took a helicopter, actually the helicopter that had brought the mail to us, and was going to hop somehow from my ship to Rota, Spain. So I took that helicopter, and it made its way to Naples, Italy, and we landed in Naples, went to the terminal there, trying to decide then how am I going to get to Rota again. As we were driving that night in the helicopter, I've been on every kind of helicopter there is in the military. I've ridden a lot more helicopters than I have aircraft, and I had the feel of how a helicopter goes, and I could tell about halfway through that flight something was wrong with that helicopter. I mean, I could just feel that there was something not quite right. But being a good chaplain, I just said a few prayers and just stayed with it. Well, we landed in Naples, and so I asked one of the pilots there, you know, where are you going from here? And he said, we're not going anywhere. We have to replace a cable, and we have to get our cable from wherever they get their cables from and fix the helicopter, so you're going to have to find your way home by yourself. So we went on in the terminal, and there were some C-141s and other aircraft landing and taking off, and a couple of them, in fact, were going to Rhoda. We couldn't take the first one because they had enough passengers on board. There were a couple of us trying to go. And another one landed, and boy, we were hoping to get on it, and discovered they had some classified stuff on that aircraft, and we could not ride on it. So it was about 11 o'clock at night, and nothing else was coming in and going out. And so they said, why don't you group of people go down to this bus stop, taxi stop down there, and go down to the hotel, spend the night, and come back tomorrow. Well, that's typical if you've taken military ops. That's what happens a lot. So we did that. We were standing down there waiting for the bus, and there was an ensign, happened to be a female, solo of this helicopter that I'd come in on, was curious to walk over there and talk to the crew. And then she came back hurriedly, and she said the helicopter's fixing to leave down to Sigonella. Sigonella is sort of the hub of that area, and you can get out of there pretty safely to any place you want to go. And so I thought, well, that's strange. And anyway, we went over there, and again, I talked to the pilot, and I said, what's going on? He said, well, we got our material a little hurriedly, now it's fixed, and we're going to go to Sigonella. And I said, well, how are you going to go? And he said, well, we'll fly low and close to the coast. And I said, well, you know, I'm not sure I want to ride that helicopter. And he looked at me, I was in my camis and everything, typical Marine chaplain. He says, Chaplain, we want you to go. Christian chaplain, by the way, I need to ask this question, and feel free to answer me. Are there any of you from any faith denominations other than Christianity, Buddhist, Muslim, or anything like that? Let me know that right now. Because I'm going to refer to the Christian faith, and I don't want to, you know, do that. I want to do it in a way that we'll all accept that. Christian chaplains wear this cross, which is on my collar, and that is a very powerful symbol. Now, Christian chaplains are like everybody else. There are chaplains that are a little rough, and there are chaplains that are very saintly kind of. You've seen chaplains in the military. They're all different kind of chaplains, but regardless of that kind of chaplain, that cross is a very powerful symbol. I saw a documentary about World War II, and these Marines inching very slowly up toward Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, and there were many, many Marines slaughtered on those beaches, just hundreds of them killed and wounded and maimed there on those beaches. And the camera that was taking that movie back in World War II panned around the area, and as he did, there in the rear, down on the beach, was a chaplain serving communion. And I thought that was very appropriate, that in the midst of this heated battle to gain the foothold in Iwo Jima, there was a chaplain back in World War II serving communion. We really can't separate religion from the military service. I believe in separation of church and state, and that's very important. But you can't separate military service and government service from religion, because you really can't separate human spirituality or spirituality in general from human beings. When those mortars and 122s and SAMs and AK-47s and that stuff begin to opening up, there's not going to be any atheists in those trenches, I guarantee you. People come to church who haven't come to church in years when that kind of stuff happens. So prayer has always been a part of the military from the very beginning of the country, and it ought to be then also a part of our peacetime armed forces also. So we will not separate our own spiritual lives from our day-to-day workplace, or from our daily activities and relationships to others in general. It's part of our lives, and it ought to be there wherever we are. So I want to talk for a few moments on the topic of prayer and moral leadership. Prayer and moral leadership. As we think about this theme, we obviously need to talk about prayer. That's what we're here for anyway, is a prayer breakfast. What is prayer? How do we pray? What is the importance of prayer in the workplace? And then secondly, the place of prayer in government service, which we're all a part in one way or the other. Is it important? And if it is important, how do we emphasize prayer? And what other values do we emphasize in American government? Thirdly, I want to emphasize moral leadership and human dignity. That is, the importance of people, the importance of you and me in what we do. People are important to God, and therefore people should be important to you. So first of all, let's talk just briefly about prayer. I'm going to provide for you, when you leave this morning, a handout. Don't let me forget to give you the handout before you leave. This is on prayer. Take it home with you and read it sometime when you get a chance. If we're to practice prayer, we ought to know how to pray effectively, and that's the title of the handout I'll give you, The Dynamics of an Effective Prayer Life. There's prayer, and then there's prayer that's effective. There's work, and then there's work that is done well, and that's the way it is with prayer, effective prayer, and you take that and read it. I'm a believer that prayer can make a difference. It can make a difference in a military command. It can make a difference in your place of work. You've heard the old saying, a family that prays together stays together. Harmony. I'm not advocating that you force your people to pray together. Don't misunderstand me there. You don't force people to get together and pray as a work section. You certainly want to respect the rights of those who don't want to pray, and certainly those who don't want to pray with you. But if members of the command or any organization pray at least individually, you can take my word for it, it will make a difference in terms of human relationships, and it will make a better product than what you do. Prayer is simply asking God to guide you and your people. That's all it really is. It's for God to guide you in what you do and to guide your people. We certainly ought to pray for each other. Prayer is seeking God's guidance in decision making when you make decisions. And I suggest that every morning prior to work that you practice a moment of prayer. It doesn't have to be long or long drawn out kind of thing, but practice a moment of prayer. I also suggest that you say a simple prayer prior to any major decision. It can be something, for example, God, I pray that you would be a part of my work. Very simple. And God will hear that prayer, and God will answer that prayer. You may not always see the answer. You may not always feel the answer. You may not always be aware that God will answer, but God will answer that prayer, any kind of prayer that you pray. So I encourage you this morning, first of all, to make prayer part of your daily life, not just on Sunday morning or before you go to bed or before meals, but make it a part of your daily life and your work life. Secondly, what is the place of prayer in government? And by extension, what is the place of prayer in your place of work, where you work here at Pinecastle? You're going to have to apply that, the answer to that, in your own individual situation. But I think that prayer has a very positive place in American government. Now, I want you to understand that this is not a biased political speech this morning, but I want to use some information from former President Bush that will help me to exemplify what I'm talking about, only as an example. Only as an example, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or whatever you are, or against former President Bush. That doesn't make any difference here. I just want to use some things he said that will help us to exemplify what I'm talking about. First of all, in his inaugural speech, he stopped, if you'll remember correctly, at the beginning of his speech, as he began, he stopped and said a prayer. Now, other presidents have did the same thing, but this one I really like, and listen to his public prayer in his inaugural speech. He said, Heavenly Father, make us strong to do your work, willing to heed and hear your will, and write on our hearts these words. Listen to these words. Use power to help people. For we are given power not to advance our own purposes, nor to make a great show in the world, nor a name. There is but one just use of power, and it is to help people. This is the President of the United States. One just use of power, and it is to help people. Help us to remember, Lord. Amen. I think this is an example of prayer in government service. Now, in addition to that prayer, portions of his inaugural speech, I think, also are applicable as guidelines for us. And so I want to go through a few things that he said during his speech and talk about them. But one of the first things he said is strength tempered by kindness, leadership identity that doesn't require showmanship. I think leadership is a humbling experience, those of you who are in leadership positions. Leadership is power to guide people to do a job. That's basically what it is. A job, though, not for the job's sake, but for the overall purpose of producing what? The pursuit of happiness. That's what I think part of what we are about as Americans, the pursuit of happiness. What is life all about if we're not happy? And as a chaplain, I see people all the time who are very unhappy. They come to counseling, they have problems. We all have problems. But if we're not pursuing happiness, we're missing part of the American dream. At Camp Lejeune, a first sergeant once told me, "Chaplain, a miserable Marine is a happy Marine." What he was saying was that Marines living under field conditions, perhaps working in the rain or some other miserable climate condition, is when a Marine is really at his best. Now, that's one philosophy of leadership. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's one philosophy of leadership anyway. Nevertheless, leadership ought to involve kindness. Leadership ought to make people happy. And my belief is if people aren't happy, you have a poor leader. People ought to be happy. Now, in circumstances like the ones you're living under, sometimes you're not happy. And there's degrees of happiness. I mean, that's natural. That's human nature. When problems come up, we're not happy. But we ought to try to pursue happiness in one way or the other. Another thing Bush said was freedom works. Now, this is a subtle reference to a philosophy, the philosophy of pragmatism. What works? You've heard the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it works, use it as long as it doesn't harm people. Another thing he said is freedom is right. This is another subtle philosophy. What is right? Here we can speak of ethics and morality. In reference to a political decision, John Kennedy once said, "We do it because it is right." I say right versus political expediency. We ought to put that philosophy in our workplace in dealing with people. We ought to do what is right, not what is going to get us ahead. That is, to advance our own career at the expense of someone else's. Bush went on to say America is civil. And this I take to mean human dignity. And I want to talk about that in a few moments. In reference to the purpose of government, he said it is to make kinder the face of a nation and gentler the face of a world. You've heard those terms, kinder and gentler. Now we can be gung-ho leaders and sailors, Marines, airmen, soldiers, civilians. We can be very gung-ho and we can be aggressive and sometimes we can chew out our subordinates. But the aim in all of this ought to be to produce a kinder and gentler, that is a better community. That is a happy community. Rather than putting stress on others, we ought to find ways to ease one another's burdens. Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Following that example, we ought to provide leadership that helps rather than hinders, that solves people problems when they occur. Bush also said in reference to helping people, the only resource we have in times of need always is the goodness and courage of the American people. The goodness and courage of the American people. Now money helps. You got to have money, but money is not the ultimate answer. Programs work. We want to come up with programs to help our work environment, but it's the people within that program that's going to make a difference, putting the emphasis on the people. The President went on and talked about healing old wounds, and this is one of the most important parts of what I would say to you today. He said, we need harmony. We have had a chorus of discordant voices. When I hear that, I think of the words team spirit. Team spirit. A good Navy team, as any other team, has its individual players. You are individual players. The coach, the quarterback, the ends, the lineman, the center, and everyone else. And what do? Do they all run in different directions? No, they work together to take the ball where it needs to go. I want to read a scripture this morning from Paul the Apostle that has to do with teamwork. And you listen to these words. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would make it any less a part of the body. And if an ear would say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as He chose. If all were a simple member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. That's what he's saying there is the very lowest part of the body that seems not to be very important. You can't dispense with it. You have to have somebody to wax the floor, or to wash the dishes, or to tune the radio, or whatever. Everybody is important, no matter how little they may seem to us. And those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor. Remember Jesus said, the most humblest among you is the greatest. And less respectable members are treated with greater respect. It's not when you see a Marine unit out in the field, I've been in the field, and chow is served. When chow is served, who is the first to go through the line? The lowest ranking individuals. The CO is the last person to go through that mess hall line. That's a tradition with the Marines. Whereas our more respectable members do not need this, but God has so arranged the body, given the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, they rejoice together with it. We're going to remember those lessons when we think about working together. Bush alluded to the need for unity. An old military term is unit. We are a unit, each one working together like a human body. We need always to keep that perspective, the big picture. No matter what we do, as sailors, we look at the big picture, the defense of our country, whatever we do, wherever we go. I'm reminded of a legend, this is a legend, I don't know where it originated, of the building of the Washington Cathedral. And the bishop visited one day as they were building the cathedral, and he walked around, and he went up to a stonemason, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm laying a stone." And he went up to another stonemason and said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a wall." And he went up to another stonemason, he says, "Well, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a cathedral to the Lord." As if he was the only one out there doing the work. What are we doing? Not just an individual job, but we're working together as service people to defend this wonderful nation. Whether we're black or white, whether we're Hispanic or Oriental, or like me, or Florida cracker, we're all working together to build our nation and to make it even freer as we live. Bush also stated, while keeping our alliances and friendships around the world strong, in other words, working with our allies, we continue a new closeness with the Soviet Union, consistent both with our security and with progress. One might say that our new relationship in part reflects the triumph of hope and strength over experience. Now, you can translate that however you want to. I translate it like this. Each one of us has a unique personality. Two people by the name of Myers and Briggs worked on a personality type indicator that talked about different personalities. And there are different personalities: extroverts, introverts, feelers, thinkers, sensors, intuitors. You put them all together, you get 16 basic types of personalities. If you're a leader and you work with people, you're going to see some very distinct personalities. We come from different religious persuasions in America, different recreational activities. Some people like pro football, some people like baseball, some people like soccer, swimming, or whatever. We come from different social and cultural backgrounds, and we like to go to different events. That's why we have so many different types of Protestant churches in this country. I used to say, well, the Lord, if you're the Lord of Christianity, why isn't it just one type of church? And I used to think, that something's wrong. Well, I've changed my mind over the years. I think that there is a purpose behind the different types of denominations. And I'll tell you why, because we're different. When I go to church, for example, I like to hear certain kinds of music, certain kinds of ways of the service goes. Some people are liturgists. They like to have a lot of responsive greetings and kneelings and standing up. So if they like that, the good thing about America is they can find a church somewhere like that. Or you can go to a church that's very free, where people are dynamic and lifting hands and singing a lot of choruses and those like that. And in America, you can go and find a church like that. And so people are different, and it's important to understand that. We like some people, it's human nature, and we don't like other kinds of people. And I'm not saying we hate is good. I'm not talking about hate. I'm simply saying we don't like some types of people, and that's okay. We don't like their particular kinds of behavior, the way they dress, or the kind of car that they drive, or whatever. And there's really nothing inherently wrong with that. And I think if you learn that lesson, you'll learn something this morning, that if you feel like there's somebody that you just can't get, there's nothing wrong with that. And you don't have to associate with somebody. You have to work with them, but you don't necessarily have to associate. Now, here's the point. Here's the point. I think one real secret of unity, if you remember this, you'll be a great leader. One real secret of unity is reaching out to those who are different than you. Making an effort on your part to reach out to people who are not like you, not to try to change them. You don't want to try to change them like you are because you're different, but to reach out and be a friend to those kind of people. How do we do that? All kind of ways. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. I submit to you, one way is praying for that person. Just simply say, God bless that person. Asking God for wisdom in dealing with everybody as a leader equally. What is right versus what is expedient for you. By living and working as God's people with a purpose. And what is the purpose? To provide freedom and liberty for all of God's children, regardless of who we are. Now I want to re-emphasize for a moment the place of human dignity. That is the place of understanding the spiritual needs and drives of your subordinates and other people. It is a requirement for sensitivity, for insight, for compassion, for courage, for promoting fairness, morality, honesty, and ethics. All these values. The wise use of power is genuinely caring for people. The proper use of power is to help people. And that is a key to success of any organization. Our country was colonized by people escaping the abuses of power. Now, unfortunately, they came and they abused power also. But at least in the beginning, they were escaping the abuses of power, especially religious power. Today's television programs, the reason I don't watch television too much, but the programs that I have watched seem to perpetuate the connotation that powerful people are devious, manipulative, cold-hearted, and ruthless. Now, each of us in the Navy in some way or another possess power. Every person in every organization, from the lowest person up, possesses some degree of power. Power is a tool for influencing people. It's a must. Anybody who controls resources, I think of the supply people, for example, certainly possess a lot of power. Somebody once said, Chaplain, one of the best person you can get to know wherever you are is a supply officer. Or supply petty officer, whatever. Anyone who establishes favorable relationships with co-workers above and below produces power. Another person said, Chaplain, one of the best persons you can get to know wherever you go is the CO's secretary. Believe me, she has a lot of power. A lot of power. I once worked for a CEO. The CO's secretary is really the CEO. She controlled the place. Anyone who establishes relationships has power. Anyone who is competent and do their job well has power. But now all these people have power. Who makes it to the top? Who makes the numero uno? Who's number one? Who are those who have the ultimate success? A study was done a few years ago, and it took several years to do this study, which analyzed the pitfalls along the path to the executive suite. And they concluded those who make it to the top, number one, exercised total integrity. They were honest, didn't lie. And by the way, in the Air Winger next week, I'm going to have an article on lying. Two, they got along with all types of people. All kinds of people. They got along with all people. That's hard to do. And they held their organizational goals, thirdly, above their own personal career goals. The organization was what was important, not their own personal ambition. Good moral leadership qualities involve cooperation, developing positive relationships, and building teams. What is moral power? And I emphasize now moral. Moral power is a worthy means to a worthy end, not an end in itself. It is value-driven, welcoming positive personal change and growth, helping individuals grow as individuals, not just increasing their work abilities. So when you're a leader, you're not just trying to help that person become a better worker, you want to help that person become a better person. Certainly they got to do the job and they got to do it well. If you help them become a better person, I guarantee you that they're going to be a better worker. They will automatically become a better worker. Now their IQ or their abilities might not put them on the top, but they're going to get better one way or another. Moral power is visionary. It sees beyond the surface of reality, the way things are, to the realm of what is possible. It is creativeness, possibility thinking, according to one television preacher, Bob Schuller, possibility thinking. Moral power is the courage to stand for moral rightness. Lieutenant General Melvin Zace, who was the commander of the U.S. Army Blood and Guts 101st Airborne Division, addressed the Armed Forces Staff College with these words. Listen. He said, the one piece of advice which I believe, this guy's got 3 stars, the one piece of advice which I believe will contribute more to making you a better leader in command, will also provide you with greater happiness and self-esteem, and at the same time advance your career more than any other. It doesn't call for any special personality. It doesn't call for any certain chemistry. Any one of you can do it. And human relationships are involved in leadership that men and women can lead and not computers. Computers don't lead. Be considerate and treat your subordinates right. I say, in the words of the way that I say these kinds of things, is love. Simply to care and love people. A good leader shows that he or she really cares. Spiritual welfare for self, for subordinates, is at the heart of respect in our day-to-day relationships with people. We watch and listen to how people address each other. We get involved. And at the same time, we are a model ourselves. We are sure that our own behavior and actions communicate respect and dignity for every single person in the organization. Now you might be saying this morning, Chaplain, what does all that have to do with prayer? Well, prayer attunes us to God's way. The bottom line is that, is it God's way? God's way is honesty. God's way is personal integrity. And God's way is love and peace and freedom and dignity for all, and all of these values that I've addressed to you this morning. I encourage you to find God's way. And how do you do that? Well, there's several ways, but one way is through prayer. Prayer to your families, in your associates, in your social circles, and again, prayer in your military commands. Once again, not forcing people to get together to pray, that's not the issue. And if you can't get other folks to pray with you, simply saying your own prayer in the word section, or at your church, or wherever you congregate, or wherever you do, by making a prayer part of your lifestyle. Pray for yourself, your leadership, and pray daily for this command, for one another. And believe me, it'll make a difference. My prayer is that God will bless you in your efforts to do so. God will bless your families, God will bless your friends, and God will bless this command.